Hey there, Internet. My name's Luxander, and today we're going to be doing kind of a 101 on non-binary pronouns. For those of you who need kind of a lead up into this topic, we're talking about non-binary gender and the pronouns associated with it today. So non-binary gender in this context means people who don't identify as men or women, and a lot of the time non-binary people also identify as trans, although not all of them do. If you're talking in the third person about someone who is of a non-binary gender, you might want to use a pronoun aside from he or she, or the person might want you to use a pronoun besides the typical he or she. I want to really quickly put up a graphic over here that has some different non-binary pronouns on there, as well as he and she pronouns and like how to conjugate them. This is not an exhaustive list, and we're only going to be talking about a few of these different options. I just wanted to throw it out there that there are different options, but I don't want to overwhelm you right out the gate. So for binary trans people, pronouns can be pretty straightforward. If you have someone who was assigned female at birth and they transition and want to be recognized as a man and male in society, then that person will be likely using he, him pronouns. Same thing with someone assigned male at birth who transitions to being a woman. That person is likely going to want you to use she and her pronouns. But how does this work for non-binary people? As you saw on this little postcard thing, there are a number of options for non-binary people to choose different pronouns. A lot of those are invented pronouns, which are words that just didn't already exist in the English language. I don't know the etymology of most of them or like when and where they came from. I just know that there are plenty of them. So in those options, you might have fey, fair, zim, here, viver, zem, per, am, air. Those were literally just all on that postcard thing. You can take the video back and look at them. There are probably a lot of subtleties to the meanings of all of the different pronoun sets. I'm sure that there are people who resonate with individual ones for particular reasons. A lot of that is very personal and just depends on the individual. These pronouns have been invented and serve a purpose because generally there is not a singular gender-neutral term in the English language that is meant to describe a single person who you know very well. For the record, I just want to say that I don't personally know anyone who insists on the use of any of these invented pronouns. I have had a couple of friends who prefer the Z here kind of setup, which were the kind of popular ones when I was a teenager and coming into my transness. I personally find the Z sound really hard to integrate into normal conversation though, so I asked at least one of these people if I could use a more common gender-neutral alternative, one that's already inbuilt into the English language and that you probably use every day in a singular way without even noticing. And that would be they, them, and their. They, them pronouns are becoming more popular for non-binary people. It seems to me like there is already language built into the language that we speak to talk about people in a gender-neutral way. For me personally, using an invented pronoun adds an additional difficulty in terms of getting people to actually do the thing. So my pronouns are they, them, their. Some people get confused as to how you can structure your sentences grammatically with they, them pronouns, because it is not technically a singular pronoun, it's technically a plural pronoun. With the invented pronouns at least, they are all designed in a singular way. They are literally meant to just transpose over he or she or whatever. With they, them pronouns, you would continue to conjugate most of your sentences and verbs in a plural form. So you would probably say something like, I made plans with my friend today, they're going to come over at 3. Or, I told my partner we were out of milk, so they went to the store. Those are personal examples of ways that you could use singular they deliberately, but you also do it without meaning to a lot. Like, oh my god, that person in the red car, they just cut me off. Generally, it's a placeholder for someone whose gender you don't know, but it's absolutely fine to use it for someone whose gender you do know and are trying to respect. It is possible for there to be some confusion in communication over whether you are actually talking about a singular person or a group of people, but I would like to point out and remind you all that you juggle this every day with the word you. Sometimes you mean you, a single person, and sometimes you mean you, a group of people, and sometimes you mean you universally in the way that I've kind of been using it constantly. And sometimes you may need to clarify when you make a general you statement, like, oh, I didn't mean you, I meant like generally you. It's not an unnatural clarification. We already do this in our daily lives. It's just using it in this other context instead of the one that you don't think about. For a lot of trans people, having our pronouns respected is very, very important to us. For binary people, it's like you need to recognize that I've made this change. You need to recognize how I actually want to work in society and like be viewed by society and how I view myself. For non-binary people, it is just as essential and in some ways can be like even more necessary for our survival to be acknowledged as non-binary. For non-binary people, having our pronouns acknowledged and respected can be essential to feeling valid and living our lives. You might have noticed, but generally society treats non-binary people like our experience of gender isn't real. They treat us like we only have these two binary options, and if we don't want to fit into one of those boxes, then there's something wrong with us. We are mentally ill, we're delusional. Even trans people, even binary trans people will say stuff like this about non-binary folks. So it's important not to just brush off pronouns like they're not important. Like if you're accustomed to calling someone by a binary pronoun and they want you to move to a non-binary one, that's not just like frivolous. It's not something that's not serious and that you can just easily brush off and ignore. It's not any less serious than a binary person's transition, and I think that there are a lot of people who may think that way. Our experiences and transitions are no less valid just because we are non-binary and not like going from one polar opposite to another. And when society not only treats you like you're just delusional, that you're mentally ill, but that the thing that you have is just not real, like it's just not a thing, when we can substantiate it throughout history, throughout different cultures, there's not even a real biological basis for a strict binary, it can really wear you down over time. It can wear away at your sense of self, it can wear away at your self-esteem, it can make you genuinely feel like you can't interact with people. So for those reasons, it is very important to learn about and validate non-binary people's gender pronoun preferences. And I think that a lot of the time, a lot of us will be willing, even if we do prefer an invented pronoun, to let most people use they and them because, again, it has utility. Fuck, I can't speak. Back when I was figuring out my social transition and how I wanted to express my gender and stuff like that, before I settled on they, them, their pronouns, I actually had a very strong preference for the Spivak pronouns am, air, or some people say it's pronounced ear, but I don't like that. It's basically like they, them, their, you just drop the th off the front, and that one you would conjugate in a singular form. It's kind of interesting though, because at the time I had people who were going to be willing to use it, like my partner was using the Spivak pronouns on Facebook and things like that, but I ultimately ended up coming down on the decision that it would just be easier and people would actually be able to make the shift to using they, them pronouns. I felt like it would be too much of an imposition to ask people to use an invented word that they weren't already accustomed to in their day-to-day. And looking back on that, I think it's kind of sad, but I also wouldn't go back on that decision, and I'm not going to now ask people to use the Spivak pronouns for me, even though when I think about it, it actually is fulfilling to me and makes me gender euphoric to think about people using them. I don't actually like they, them pronouns, y'all. I just use them because that's what is necessary to get people to actually do the thing. And even then, I'm not super insistent. I have times in my life where I just let people use either of the binary sets because it's easier, because I feel like I'm imposing on people to get them to use the language that is actually correct for describing me and doesn't make me feel like I'm being jabbed in the side with a needle. But yeah, it's interesting. They, them pronouns actually feel to me like a removal of or an absence of something, whereas the am pronouns feel like an encompassment of something. But that's just me. Anyway, I hope that this was educational for you. If I missed anything, feel free to comment your extra questions down below and I'll try to get to those. I've been seeing a lot of people lately who just seem confused about the basics of this, so I wanted to get that kind of out of the way, the 101 stuff, explain some of the like emotional reasons why it's necessary to properly address people, as well as addressing some of those grammatical things that I don't think a lot of other people acknowledge when they're making these arguments. That's all from me today though. If you liked this video, give me pretty analytics to look at and comments to read. Find me on Patreon, subscribe to this channel, ring the bell, and I really hope that you have an okay day. Bye. Happy New Year and hello to all of these new patrons we've got. I want to give a special thanks to David Walter, Gretchen Becker, Jenny Swindles, Pinesnake, and Zendrex. If you want to join the text list, it's $1 a month, and if you want to have your name read out, it's $10 a month for the end of every video. So, do that.